In harbour sports and outdoors, a quiet veteran with a prosthetic leg was about to face devastating public humiliation. What started as shopping for youth camping supplies took a shocking turn when he encountered an arrogant manager's prejudice. Marcus Rodriguez wasn't your typical customer. For 12 years, he had served as a Navy SEAL, earning the Medal of Honor for saving 6 teammates in Afghanistan. When Derek Morrison accused him of shoplifting and called his military ID fake, Rodriguez had no idea his former SEAL teammates would orchestrate a coordinated response. His dignified restraint would trigger a community-wide reckoning. What began as one man's humiliation became a lesson in brotherhood and accountability that transformed an entire town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog was lifting from Seabrook Harbour when Marcus Rodriguez pushed through the glass doors of Harbour Sports and Outdoors, the familiar weight of his prosthetic leg creating a subtle rhythm against the polished floor. Saturday mornings always brought crowds to the store, families preparing for weekend adventures, children pressing their faces against the fishing tackle displays, while parents debated the merits of different camping gear. Marcus moved with deliberate care through the bustling aisles, his weathered hands occasionally steadying himself against the merchandise displays. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen combat and survived, though the slight hitch in his gait told a story he rarely shared with strangers. Today's mission was simple: purchase camping supplies for the upcoming retreat with his Youth Veterans Program. 15 kids, ages 14 to 18, all children of military families, all needing to understand that service and sacrifice weren't abstract concepts but living legacies. Near the camping section, Marcus paused to examine a set of sleeping bags, running his fingers over the fabric to test its quality. The program operated on a tight budget, and every purchase needed to count. He lifted one bag, checking the temperature, rating, then set it down to compare it with another model. His movements were methodical, professional, the habits of a man who understood that the right equipment could mean the difference between safety and disaster. "Can I help you with something?" The voice carried an edge that made Marcus look up. Derek Morrison stood 3 feet away, his Harbour Sports polo shirt stretched tight across his chest, a name tag identifying him as store manager, pinned slightly crooked above his breast pocket. His arms were crossed, and his eyes held the kind of suspicion Marcus had learned to recognize in certain civilians, the look of someone who saw his disability first and the man second. "Just comparing sleeping bags," Marcus replied evenly, "for a youth camping program." Derek's gaze dropped to Marcus's prosthetic leg, then swept over his worn jeans and faded Marine Corps t-shirt. "Uh-huh. And you're planning to buy these when?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, not fear, but the hypervigilance that combat veterans never quite shed. Around them, other customers continued their Saturday morning shopping, oblivious to the tension building in aisle 7. "Once I've made my selection," Marcus said, his voice maintaining the calm tone that had gotten him through 12 years of military service. "I need enough for 15 kids, so I want to make sure I'm getting the right gear." Derek stepped closer, and Marcus caught the scent of stale coffee and something else, the sour smell of a man under stress. "Right. Well, this isn't a library. You can't just handle the merchandise without buying it. Store policy." Marcus straightened slowly, his training automatically cataloging exits, potential weapons, civilian positions. Not because he expected violence, but because 20 years of muscle memory didn't simply disappear with discharge papers. "I understand. I'm a serious buyer. I run the Harbour Youth Veterans Program, and we have a retreat next weekend." "Sure, you do. Derek's laugh held no humor. Look, buddy, I've been watching you for 20 minutes. You've been all over this store, touching everything, not buying anything. That's called shoplifting, where I come from. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around them, conversations began to falter, as other customers sensed the confrontation brewing. An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap looked up from the fishing section, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Sir," Marcus kept his voice level, though his hands had unconsciously moved to the position they'd held countless times during military briefings, clasped behind his back, shoulders square. "I'm not shoplifting. I'm shopping for my program. If you'd like, I can show you my identification and—" "Oh, now you want to show ID," Derek's voice rose, drawing more attention. "After wandering around my store for half an hour? Let me guess, you've got some sob story about being a veteran, right? Got some fake military card you printed off the internet?" The words landed like shrapnel, each one designed to wound. Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, his movements deliberate and visible. Habits learned in countries where sudden gestures could prove fatal. He withdrew a worn leather bifold and extracted his military ID, still valid for base access, along with his driver's license. Derek barely glanced at the cards before handing them back. "Anyone can get these made. You think I was born yesterday? A woman pushing a shopping cart had stopped nearby, her mouth slightly open in shock. Her young son tugged at her sleeve, asking in a whisper why the man was being mean. Marcus's peripheral vision caught more customers turning to watch, their weekend shopping suddenly interrupted by a scene none of them had expected. "Sir," Marcus tried again, his training fighting against the rising tide of humiliation. "These are legitimate documents. I served 12 years in the Navy, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan. I lost my leg in Kandahar province while—" "Save it for someone who cares," Derek cut him off. "Frank! Frank!" A security guard emerged from behind the customer service counter. An older man with gentle eyes who wore his uniform like he'd rather be anywhere else. Frank had been working security at Harbor Sports for 8 years, long enough to know most of the local customers by sight. "Frank, I need you to escort this gentleman out of the store," Derek announced loudly enough for half the store to hear. "He's been loitering, handling merchandise without purchasing, and now he's causing a disturbance." Frank's eyes widened as he recognized Marcus. Everyone in Seabrook Harbor knew Marcus Rodriguez, though most knew him simply as the quiet man who ran the youth program, who helped kids learn outdoor skills and respect for service. Frank had served 2 tours in Vietnam himself, and he recognized the particular way Marcus carried himself, the bearing that never quite left a combat veteran. "Mr. Morrison," Frank said quietly, "I don't think that's necessary. This is Marcus Rodriguez. I don't care who he says he is," Derek snapped. "Store policy is store policy. Either he makes a purchase right now or he leaves." Marcus felt the weight of 24 stares, heard the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the camping section. A teenage girl with dark hair had appeared. Near the store's entrance, Grace, his daughter, who had walked over from the coffee shop next door. Even from 50 feet away, he could see the confusion and anger building in her expression as she processed the scene. The moment stretched taut as fishing line. Marcus looked at Derek Morrison, really looked at him, saw the insecurity masked, his authority, the small-minded prejudice dressed up as policy enforcement, the bitter anger of a man taking his failures out on someone he perceived as vulnerable. Marcus had faced down insurgents with more honor than this man showed on a Saturday morning in his own community. "You know what?" Derek's voice cut through the silence. "I'm banning you from this store, permanently. We don't need freeloaders and troublemakers in here, taking up space and bothering our real customers." "Duh." The words echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing back from displays of outdoor gear that Marcus would have gladly purchased. that he needed for kids who looked up to him as an example of service and sacrifice. Instead, he stood accused of theft in front of his neighbors, his character questioned, his service dismissed as fiction. Marcus nodded once, a sharp military acknowledgement that contained no submission. Understood. He turned with the same precision he'd used in formation drills, his prosthetic leg steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Frank stepped aside, his face flushed with embarrassment that wasn't his to carry. The elderly Vietnam veteran near the fishing tackle caught Marcus's eye and offered a subtle nod of respect, a gesture that said more than any words could. As Marcus moved toward the exit, conversations resumed in hushed, urgent tones. Cell phones appeared in hands, thumbs moving quickly across screens. The woman with the shopping cart was already dialing a number, her face flushed with indignation. Near the entrance, Grace Rodriguez watched her father approach, her young face a mask of confusion and barely contained fury. Derek Morrison stood, victorious in aisle 7, surrounded by camping gear and the echoing aftermath of his authority. He had no idea that in the next 30 minutes his name would be spoken in a dozen phone calls throughout Seabrook Harbor. He had no conception that the quiet man he'd just humiliated was a Medal of Honor recipient who had saved 6 lives in Afghanistan before losing his leg to an IED. He couldn't know that Marcus Rodriguez's former SEAL teammates now owned 3 of the most successful businesses in town, or that his treatment of a decorated veteran would be the spark that ignited a firestorm of community response. All Derek knew was that he'd shown everyone who was in charge. Outside, the morning fog had completely lifted, revealing the clear blue sky that promised a beautiful weekend. Marcus Rodriguez walked toward his truck, his daughter falling into step beside him, and neither of them spoke. There would be time for words later, time for explanations and conversations about dignity and response. But first, the word would spread. It was already spreading, carried on the voices of shocked customers and the rapid-fire text messages of a community that had just witnessed something that shouldn't happen anywhere, but especially not in Seabrook Harbor, and especially not to one of their own. The first call came through while Sarah "Tank" Thompson was reviewing blueprints on a construction site overlooking the harbor. Her phone buzzed against the hard hat resting on her makeshift desk, a piece of plywood stretched between 2 sawhorses. The number belonged to Mrs. Chen, Doc's mother, who occasionally called about community matters, but never on Saturday mornings. "Sarah, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting your work." The elderly woman's voice carried an unusual tension. "But I just witnessed something at Harbor Sports that has me absolutely sick to my stomach." Tank straightened, her attention shifting from foundation specs to the tremor in Mrs. Chen's voice. Around her, the construction crew continued their weekend overtime, the sound of hammering and power tools creating a steady backdrop of productivity. "What happened?" Tank asked, though something in her gut already knew this involved someone she cared about. "They threw Marcus Rodriguez out of the store. That new manager, Derek something, accused him of shoplifting right in front of everyone. Called his military ID fake, said he was a freeloader and a troublemaker. Sarah, it was awful. Marcus just stood there taking it, dignified as you please, while that man humiliated him." The blueprint in Tank's hands crinkled as her grip tightened. Marcus Rodriguez, quiet, principled Marcus, who'd pulled her from a burning Humvee in Kandahar, who'd recommended her for SEAL training when half the brass thought women had no business in special operations. Marcus, who ran a youth program for military kids and never asked for recognition, never talked about his Medal of Honor except when the kids needed to understand what service really meant. "I'll call you back," Tank said, her voice carrying the clipped precision that her construction crew recognized as a sign to give her space. The second call was already coming in as she hung up with Mrs. Chen. This time, it was Elena Vasquez from the Seabrook Gazette, her voice pitched with the controlled excitement of a journalist who'd stumbled onto something significant. "Tank, I'm getting reports about an incident at Harbor Sports involving Marcus Rodriguez. Can you confirm?" "I'll have to call you back, Elena." Tank's fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, pulling up the contact list that connected her to the handful of people who mattered most in this world. The Brotherhood, though she'd fought tooth and nail to earn that designation, that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life and continued to anchor her in civilian waters that sometimes felt more treacherous than any battlefield. Doc Chen answered on the first ring. "Tank, please tell me you're calling about the Martinez permit approval and not what I think you're calling about." "Mrs. Chen already called you?" A sigh carried across the connection. "She called me, my wife, and probably half the town council by now. Sarah, this is bad, really bad. Marcus being treated like that in public. Where is he now?" "Home. I assume. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. You know how he gets when he's processing something. Shuts down, goes internal." Tank understood. They all did. Marcus had been their anchor during deployment, the steady voice that talked them through the chaos when everything went sideways. But he'd also been the one who absorbed impacts, emotional, physical, psychological, with a stoicism that worried them even when they needed it most. "I'm calling Tommy," Tank said. "We need to meet." "Already ahead of you. Restaurants closed. For a private event starting at 7. Told Marcus it was about the youth program fundraiser." "And he bought that?" "Marcus wants to believe the best in people, Tank. Sometimes that includes believing our lies when we're trying to help him." 15 minutes later, Tank was in her truck heading toward town, her construction crew left with clear instructions and a promise of overtime pay. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across her shoulders, not the responsibility of command, but something deeper, the obligation that came with being family to someone who'd never learned to ask for help. Her phone rang again. Tommy this time, his voice carrying the forced lightness he used when he was trying not to break something. "Please tell me you've heard from Marcus," he said without preamble. "Doc tried calling. Nothing. You?" "Grace is at the restaurant. Came in about 20 minutes ago, madder than I've ever seen her. Kids ready to march back to that store and give that manager a piece of her mind." Tank felt her chest tighten. Grace Rodriguez was 16, idealistic and fiercely protective of her father. She'd grown up watching Marcus navigate the world with a prosthetic leg and the invisible scars of combat, had seen how some people treated him differently once they noticed his disability. The girl had inherited her father's sense of justice, but lacked his hard-earned patience. "Keep her there," Tank said. "Whatever it takes. Last thing Marcus needs is his daughter getting arrested for assault." "Already handled. Put her to work in the kitchen. Told her if she really wants to help her dad, she can help us plan how to handle this the right way. Smart kid, she gets it. Doesn't like it, but she gets it." Tank pulled into the parking lot of Rodriguez Family Hardware, a small store that had been in Marcus's family for 3 generations before he'd taken it over after his discharge. The "closed" sign hung in the window, but she could see light spilling from the office in the back. Marcus's truck sat alone in the lot, positioned precisely between the painted lines, with the kind of attention to detail that had made him an exceptional soldier, and now made him a reliable neighbor. She found him in the office, surrounded by paperwork for the youth program, his prosthetic leg propped against a chair while he worked. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the careful mask he wore when he was trying to protect others from his pain. "Tank, heard you were working. A weekend job. Heard you had some trouble at Harbor Sports." Marcus set down his pen with deliberate care. News travels fast in a small town. News travels fast when someone disrespects family. The word hung between them. Family. Not the family of blood or marriage, but the family forged in shared Fire, strengthened by mutual sacrifice, defined by the understanding that some bonds transcended ordinary definitions of loyalty. "It's handled," Marcus said quietly. "No need for anyone to get worked up." Tank pulled up a chair, settling into it with the easy familiarity of someone who'd shared foxholes and understood silence. "Marcus, that manager called you a freeloader. In front of half the town. Called your military ID fake, banned you from a store where you've been shopping for 10 years. And I walked away. No harm done." No harm. Tank's voice carried the edge that had made insurgents nervous and drill instructors proud. "Marcus, that man humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient in front of children. Grace saw it happen. Your kids in the program are going to hear about it. The whole town's talking about it." Marcus's hands stilled on the paperwork. For a moment the mask slipped, and Tank saw the hurt he was carrying, not just from today's incident, but from every time someone had looked at his disability and made assumptions, every time his service had been questioned or dismissed, every small indignity that accumulated like scar tissue around a warrior's heart. "What do you want me to do, Tank? Storm back in there? Make demands?" "That's not who I am anymore." "No," Tank said softly. "But it's who we are. All of us. Doc, Tommy, me. We're your family, Marcus, and family doesn't let family stand alone." Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to fade over Seabrook Harbor, casting long shadows across the water. In restaurants and coffee shops, in construction sites and medical offices, phones were ringing and conversations were starting. A community was awakening to the realization that one of their own had been wronged, and that wrong demanded response. Marcus Rodriguez sat in his office, surrounded by the paperwork of a life dedicated to service, while around him the machinery of loyalty and love began to turn. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to learn that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from accepting the support of those who refuse to let you fall. The Harbor's Edge restaurant fell quiet as the last regular customer left at 7:30, the Saturday evening crowd giving way to something more intimate and purposeful. Tommy Jackson moved through his restaurant with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd learned that feeding people was its own form of service, dimming lights and locking doors while his staff cleaned up from the dinner rush. In the back corner booth, the same one where they'd celebrated Doc's medical school graduation, Tank's first major construction contract, and Tommy's third year of sobriety, 3 former Navy SEALs sat across from each other, their civilian clothes unable to completely disguise the bearing that marked them as warriors. Doc Chen arrived first, still wearing scrubs from an emergency call that had pulled him away from his Saturday evening. His stethoscope hung around his neck like a talisman, and his usually calm demeanor carried an edge that his patients rarely saw. James Chen had been their medic, the one who'd patched them up and sent them back into the fight, and his protective instincts toward his team had never dulled. Tank Thompson came in through the kitchen entrance, her work boots still dusty from the construction site, her blonde hair pulled back in the functional ponytail that had become her trademark. She'd changed from her work clothes, but still carried herself with the confident stride of someone who'd fought for every inch of respect. In a male-dominated world, and one, Tommy set down 3 cups of coffee without being asked. Black for Doc, cream for Tank, and his own, with enough sugar to fuel a small aircraft. His hands were steady now, had been for 4 years, but his teammates still watched for the subtle tremors that had once threatened to end his civilian life before it began. "So," Tommy said, settling into the booth, "our boy got his ass handed to him by a retail tyrant, and now half the town's ready to burn down Harbor Sports. Where do we start?" Doc pulled out his phone, scrolling through a series of text messages. "I've gotten calls from 6 different people in the last 2 hours. Mrs. Patterson saw the whole thing. She said Derek Morrison was looking for a fight from the moment Marcus walked in. Apparently, it wasn't the first time he's been aggressive with customers." Tank leaned forward, her elbows on the table. What do you mean, not the first time? Remember old Mr. Vasquez, Elena's father-in-law? He came to my clinic 2 weeks ago, shaken up about something. Wouldn't say what at first, but when I pressed him, he told me about an incident at Harbour Sports. Manager accused him of trying to return stolen merchandise, made a scene in front of other customers. Same pattern, public humiliation, questioning. His character, using his authority to bully someone he saw as vulnerable. Tommy's jaw tightened. So this Derek Morrison has a history of being a piece of work. Gets worse, Doc continued. I made some calls after Tank and I talked. Reached out to Jim Foster. He's on the town council with me, works in corporate. Compliance. Turns out Harbour Sports has had 3 formal complaints filed against this store in the past month. All involving Morrison, all dismissed by corporate as personality conflicts. Tank felt the familiar heat building in her chest, the same fire that had driven her through SEAL training when instructors told her she didn't belong, through combat deployments when some teammates questioned her readiness, through every boardroom where contractors assumed she was someone's secretary. It was righteous anger, carefully controlled but ready to be weaponized. So we're not just dealing with one bad day, she said. We're dealing with a pattern of abuse that corporate is choosing to ignore. Doc nodded. And now he's picked on the wrong person. Marcus Rodriguez isn't just any customer. He's a Medal of Honor recipient who spent the last 8 years quietly serving this community. He runs programs for at-risk kids, volunteers at the VA, helps families navigate military bureaucracy. He's earned respect the hard way. Tommy stood up, pacing behind the booth with the restless energy that had once made him one of the most effective point men in their unit. Okay, so we know the enemy. Question is, how do we respond? Marcus isn't going to want us going nuclear on this guy. No, Tank agreed. Marcus would rather eat glass than have us fight his battles for him. So we don't fight his battles, we fight for the principle. This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. Doc pulled out a notebook, his medical training translating into methodical problem-solving. We need to be smart about this. Legal, ethical, but effective. What are our assets? Tank counted off on her fingers. I've got relationships with half the contractors in town. When they hear about this, they're going to be pissed. A lot of them are veterans themselves, and they all know Marcus. I've got the medical community, Doc added. Plus my position on the town council gives me access to official channels. I can file complaints, request investigations, make sure this gets the attention it deserves. And preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tommy stopped pacing, a slow smile spreading across his face. And I've got something. Even better, I've got the restaurant. This is where everyone comes to talk, to share information, to plan things. Half the town eats here every week. Information warfare, Tank said, recognizing the tactical advantage. We don't need to attack. We just need to make sure everyone knows what happened and why it matters. Doc looked up from his notebook. What about Rivera? He's due for a visit anyway, right? Checking up on us civilian types, making sure we're not going completely soft? The mention of their former commanding officer brought a different energy to the conversation. Captain Rivera had been more than their CO. He'd been their mentor, their advocate, the man who'd written the recommendations that got Tank into SEAL training and helped Doc get early discharge to care for his parents. His presence in Seabrook Harbor would add weight to any response they mounted. Rivera's scheduled to fly in Tuesday, Tommy confirmed. Routine check-in, but I bet he'd be interested to hear about this. Man doesn't like seeing his people disrespected. And Tank leaned back in the booth, her strategic mind already mapping possibilities. So we have leverage. Business community, medical community, local government, military connections. The question is how to use it without crossing lines that Marcus wouldn't cross himself. We embarrass them, Doc said quietly. Not through lies or manipulation, but through truth. We make sure everyone knows exactly what happened, exactly who Derek Morrison is, and exactly what Harbor Sports Corporate is tolerating. We let the community decide how to respond. Tommy sat back down, his expression serious now. And if corporate doesn't like the heat, if they try to circle the wagons and protect Morrison? Tank's smile carried no warmth. Then they learn. What happens when you disrespect a Navy SEAL's family in a town where his teammates own businesses, sit on the town council, and feed half the population every week? The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of decision settling around them. Outside, Seabrook Harbor continued its Saturday evening rhythm, families finishing dinner, couples walking along the waterfront, teenagers gathering at the pier. None of them knew that in a back booth at Harbor's Edge restaurant, a careful campaign was being planned, not for revenge, but for justice. Doc closed his notebook. So we're doing this. We're doing this, Tank confirmed. Tommy raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To Marcus Rodriguez, who taught us that the strongest response isn't always the loudest one. They drank to their absent brother and began planning a reckoning that would honor everything he'd taught them about. Strength, principle, and the true meaning of service. Outside, Elena Vasquez was parking her car, having heard about the gathering and hoping for an interview. The next phase of the operation was about to begin. Elena Vasquez sat across from the three former SEALs, her digital recorder between them. On the scarred wooden table, her notebook filled with careful shorthand that captured not just words, but the controlled anger that hummed beneath their measured responses. As a military spouse herself, her husband Diego currently deployed with the 82nd Airborne, she understood the particular fury that came from watching a brother-in-arms be disrespected. "Walk me through what each of you heard," Elena said, her voice carrying the professional calm that had earned her respect in a newsroom full of veterans twice her age. "I need multiple sources, different perspectives." Tank spoke first, her construction-calloused hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Mrs. Chen called me at 11:30. She was shaken up. I've never heard her voice like that. She said Derek Morrison accused Marcus of shoplifting, called his military ID fake, and banned him from the store permanently, all in front of other customers." Doc nodded, consulting his own notes. "My mother called 5 minutes later. Same story, but she added details about Morrison's behavior before the confrontation. Apparently, he'd been watching Marcus with suspicion from the moment. He walked in, following him around the store like he expected trouble." Elena's pen moved quickly across the page. She'd covered enough military stories to understand the significance of what she was hearing. Not just a customer service complaint, but a fundamental violation of the respect owed to those who'd served. "Tommy, what did Grace tell you when she came to the restaurant?" Tommy leaned forward, his usual easy humor replaced by something harder. "Kid was furious. Said she watched through the window, saw her dad try to show his ID, heard Morrison dismiss it without even looking. She wanted to go back and give that manager a piece of her mind." "And how long has Marcus been a customer at Harbor Sports?" 10 years, maybe more," Doc answered, "since he took over the family hardware store. He buys camping gear there for the youth program, fishing supplies, outdoor equipment. Never had a problem until Morrison showed up." Elena made another note. The pattern was becoming clear. A new manager with a history of aggressive behavior targeting a long-standing customer with no prior incidents. The kind of story that wrote itself once you had the facts. "Tell me about Derek Morrison. What do you know about him?" Doc exchanged glances with his teammates before answering. I made some calls after we talked this afternoon. Morrison was transferred here from the corporate office 3 months ago. Word is it wasn't a promotion. It was a lateral move after some kind of incident at headquarters. What kind of incident? That's what I'm trying to find out. But Jim Foster, he's on the town council with me, works in corporate compliance. He said Harbor Sports has received multiple complaints about Morrison's behavior since he arrived. Aggressive customer interactions, policy violations, creating hostile situations. Elena's investigative instincts sharpened. Multiple complaints? How many? At least 3 formal ones that Foster knows about, all dismissed by corporate as personality conflicts or misunderstandings, but the pattern suggests they're protecting him for some reason. Tank set down her coffee cup with enough force to make it ring against the saucer. Or they just don't care. Big corporation, small, town store, easier to ignore complaints than deal with a problem manager. Elena nodded, understanding the dynamic. She'd seen it before in her coverage of veteran affairs, institutions that talked about supporting the military community while ignoring or dismissing individual cases of discrimination or disrespect. I need to talk to witnesses, Elena said. People who saw what happened today. Tommy pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. Mrs. Patterson was there. She's called 3 times already, wanting to know what she can do to help. Old Mr. Vasquez, your father-in-law, he might talk to you about his own experience with Morrison. Jim Henley from the bait shop was there too, Doc added. Marine veteran, 2 tours in Iraq. He saw the whole thing and he's not happy about it. Elena made notes of each name, building her source list with the methodical care that had made her the Seabrook Gazette's most trusted reporter despite her young age. What about corporate response? Have any of you reached out to Harbor Sports? Headquarters? Not yet, Tank said. We wanted to coordinate our approach, make sure we were representing the facts accurately. But Elena, this needs to be about more than just what happened to Marcus today. This is about a pattern of behavior that corporate is choosing to ignore. Elena understood. The story was bigger than a single incident. It was about accountability, about how corporations treat decorated veterans, about the responsibility businesses have to their communities, the kind of story that could resonate beyond Seabrook Harbor's borders. I'm going to need to reach out to Harbor Sports Corporate for comment, Elena said. Standard journalistic practice, but based on what you're telling me, I'm not expecting much cooperation. Doc leaned back in the booth. What are you thinking for timeline? When would this run? Monday's paper, front page. But I want to post the digital version Sunday night, get it out there while people are still talking about it. Social media moves fast, and this kind of story can build momentum quickly if it's handled right. Tommy stood up, moving toward the kitchen. You need anything else from us? Food, coffee, access to more witnesses? Actually, yes. I need you to call Captain Rivera. The 3 teammates exchanged looks. Elena caught the silent communication that passed between them, the kind of wordless understanding that came from shared combat experience. Rivera's not going to want to get involved in civilian politics, Tank said carefully. This isn't politics, Elena replied. This is about respect for military service. If Derek Morrison is creating a hostile environment for veterans, that affects military readiness, family support, community relations. Rivera needs to know what's happening in his backyard. Doc nodded slowly. She's right. And Rivera's got enough rank to make Harbor Sports Corporate take notice. Phone call from a Navy captain carries more weight than complaints from local customers. Elena finished her notes and clicked off the recorder. I'll have a draft ready by tomorrow evening. But I want you to know, once this story runs, there's no going back. Derek Morrison is going to be in the spotlight. Harbor Sports is going to face public scrutiny, and this whole situation is going to get bigger than just a local incident. Tank's smile was sharp as a blade. That's exactly what we're counting on. Outside the restaurant, Seabrook Harbour settled into its Saturday night rhythm, unaware that by Sunday evening the town's name would be trending on veteran advocacy websites, and that a customer service incident at a sporting goods store would become a case study in corporate accountability and community response. Elena Vasquez packed up her recorder and notebooks, her mind already composing the lead paragraph that would turn a local injustice into a national conversation. She had 24 hours to craft a story that would honor Marcus Rodriguez's service, while holding Derek Morrison and Harbour Sports accountable for their failures. In the back booth of Harbour's Edge restaurant, 3 former Navy SEALs sat in comfortable silence, knowing that the first shot in their carefully planned campaign had just been fired. Not with weapons or violence, but with something more powerful. In the modern world, truth, backed by the credibility of those who'd earned the right to speak it. Captain Miguel Rivera's flight from Naval Station Norfolk touched down at the regional airport 40 minutes ahead of schedule, the military transport, cutting through Monday morning fog with the efficiency that marked everything about the man himself. At 45, Rivera carried his rank with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned every promotion through merit and sacrifice, his dress blues perfectly pressed despite the early flight. He'd planned this visit as a routine check-in with his former teammates, the kind of personal touch that had made him beloved by the sailors under his command. Doc Chen had called him Sunday night with an unusual request. Could Rivera extend his visit by a day? There was a situation involving Marcus Rodriguez that required delicate handling. Rivera had known Marcus Rodriguez for 15 years, had watched him evolve from a promising young SEAL into one of the finest operators he'd ever commanded. When Marcus lost his leg in Afghanistan while saving 6 members of his squad, Rivera had personally ensured that his Medal of Honor recommendation moved through channels with unprecedented speed. The idea that anyone would disrespect such a man left Rivera with the cold fury that had once made enemy combatants nervous. The black sedan that met him at the airport carried him directly to Marcus's hardware store, where Rivera found his former subordinate reorganizing inventory with the methodical precision that had made him invaluable in combat situations. Marcus looked up as Rivera entered, and for a moment the years fell away, 2 warriors acknowledging each other with the kind of respect that transcended rank and circumstance. "Captain," Marcus said, straightening instinctively despite their civilian setting, "heard you were coming to check on the local troublemakers." Rivera's smile carried genuine warmth, but his eyes held the sharpness that had made him one of the Navy's youngest captains. "Heard you had some trouble yourself, Rodriguez. Want to tell me about it?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus recounted Saturday's incident with the spare precision he'd once used for mission debriefs. Rivera listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively harder as the details emerged. When Marcus finished, Rivera was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the facts but their implications. "This Derek Morrison," Rivera said finally, "he questioned the authenticity of your military ID, called it fake, said anyone could get one made." Rivera's jaw tightened. In his 15 years of command, he'd seen plenty of civilian disrespect for military service, but questioning the credentials of a Medal of Honor recipient crossed a line that demanded response. "Captain, I handled it," Marcus continued. "Walked away, maintained dignity, no need for escalation." "Marcus," Rivera's voice carried the tone that had once commanded respect from admirals and enlisted men alike. "When someone disrespects you, they disrespect everyone who's ever served under your leadership. That includes me." Across town, Elena Vasquez's story had gone live on the Seabrook Gazette's website at 6 a.m., and by 9 a.m. it was spreading across social media with the viral velocity that marked truly resonant content. The headline, Medal of Honor recipient humiliated at local store had been shared thousands of times, picked up by veteran advocacy groups and forwarded through military networks where respect for decorated heroes was considered sacred. Harbor Sports corporate headquarters in Atlanta was fielding its 15th media call of the morning when Rivera's aide contacted their public relations department. The message was simple. Captain Rivera, representing Naval Special Warfare Command, would be conducting an assessment of veteran treatment in the Seabrook Harbor area. Harbor Sports was welcome to participate or decline, but the assessment would proceed regardless. Derek Morrison arrived at work Monday morning to find 3 messages from corporate on his voicemail, each one more urgent than the last. The final message from Regional Director Alan Hughes was succinct. Call me immediately. Do not speak to any media. Do not take any action regarding the Rodriguez incident. By 10 a.m., local businesses throughout Seabrook Harbor were displaying signs in their windows. Veterans welcome here. We honor our heroes. And simply, Marcus Rodriguez shops here. Sarah Thompson's construction company had printed 50 signs overnight and was distributing them free of charge to any business that wanted one. The response crystallized when Rivera walked into Harbor's Edge restaurant for lunch, his dress blues drawing immediate attention from the dozen customers eating. Tommy's famous fish and chips. Word spread quickly. A Navy captain was in town, and he was asking questions about veteran treatment. Tommy approached Rivera's table with the easy confidence of a man who'd served under his command and trusted him completely. "Captain, heard you were making the rounds. Anything the local business community should know about?" Rivera's response was measured but clear. "I'm conducting an informal assessment of how this community treats its veterans. So far, I'm impressed by what I'm seeing, with one notable exception." The message carried through the restaurant like ripples on still water. Within an hour, it had reached every corner of Seabrook Harbor. A Navy captain was evaluating veteran treatment, and Harbor Sports had already failed his inspection. At 2 p.m., Doc Chen received a call from Harbor Sports Corporate requesting an immediate meeting with community leaders. The caller, identifying herself as Maya Patel, district manager, would arrive tomorrow morning prepared to address any concerns and ensure complete satisfaction for all parties involved. Rivera spent the afternoon visiting with his former teammates, but his presence served a dual purpose. Every person who saw him, in his dress blues, wearing his ribbons and command pin, understood that this situation had escalated beyond local politics. This was now a military matter, involving the treatment of decorated veterans and the respect owed to those who'd sacrificed for their country. Grace Rodriguez found Rivera at her father's store that evening, her teenage composure cracking slightly, as she approached the man whose reputation preceded him into every room. "Captain Rivera, I'm Grace Rodriguez, Marcus's daughter." Rivera stood immediately, his attention focused with the intensity that had made him legendary among his subordinates. "Miss Rodriguez, your father's told me a lot about you. I wanted to thank you for coming. Dad won't admit it, but what happened Saturday really hurt him. Not just the embarrassment, but having his service questioned, his sacrifice dismissed. He spent 8 years serving this community, and to have someone treat him like that." Rivera's expression softened slightly, revealing the man behind the rank. "Grace, your father is one of the finest men I've ever served with. What happened to him was wrong, and it's being addressed. But I want you to understand something. Your father's response to that situation, maintaining his dignity under pressure, refusing to escalate or retaliate, that's real strength. That's leadership." Grace nodded, blinking back tears she'd been holding since Saturday morning. "I know. I just wish other people understood that." "They will," Rivera said with quiet certainty. "By the time this is over, everyone will understand exactly who Marcus Rodriguez is and what he represents. Outside, the lights of Seabrook Harbour reflected off the calm water of the harbour, and in businesses throughout the town, conversations were taking place about respect, service, and the bonds that held communities together. Tomorrow would bring corporate representatives and formal responses, but tonight a Navy captain's presence had already sent a message that would reverberate far beyond the boundaries of one small coastal town. The cavalry had arrived, and harbour. Sports was about to learn that disrespecting a Navy SEAL's family in a military town was a mistake, with consequences they hadn't anticipated. Maya Patel's rental car navigated Seabrook Harbour's narrow streets at 7 a.m. Tuesday morning, her GPS guiding her past businesses that seemed to mock her mission with every veteran's welcome here sign displayed in their windows. As Harbour Sports district manager for the Southeast region, she'd handled her share of customer service crises, but nothing had prepared her for the perfect storm of military honor, community solidarity, and viral media attention that had exploded around what should have been a routine personnel issue. The Army logistics training that had shaped her early career kicked in as she surveyed the tactical situation. This wasn't just about one disgruntled customer. This was about institutional credibility in a community where military service was revered and corporate missteps became local legend. Her phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. with calls from corporate headquarters, each one more urgent than the last. Maya parked outside Harbour Sports and Outdoors and took a moment to study the building. Through the windows, she could see Derek Morrison moving through the store with jerky, nervous energy, his usual swagger replaced by the haunted look of a man who'd awakened to find his world collapsing. Two customers browsed the fishing section, but the typical Tuesday morning crowd was noticeably absent. Inside, Derek approached her with forced confidence that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Patel, Derek Morrison, store manager, glad corporate sent someone to help sort out this misunderstanding." Maya studied him with the analytical gaze that had made her successful in corporate environments where perception mattered as much as performance. Derek Morrison was younger than his file suggested, carrying himself with the brittle authority of someone who'd been given power without earning the wisdom to wield it responsibly. "Mr. Morrison, let's be clear about something from the start. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a customer service failure that has escalated into a public relations nightmare. I'm here to assess the damage and determine how to proceed." Derek's face flushed. "Look, I was just enforcing store policy. We're partnering with veteran service organizations to ensure our stores become genuinely welcoming spaces for those who've served." The room was quiet as Maya continued. "But beyond policies and procedures, this situation has taught me something important about corporate responsibility. We can't just claim to support veterans. We have to earn that support through our actions, every day, in every interaction." Tommy Jackson raised his hand. "What about Marcus? What about making this right with him personally?" Maya nodded. "I'll be meeting with Mr. Rodriguez this afternoon, not to offer him compensation or try to buy his silence, but to apologize personally and ask for his guidance on how we can do better. A man of his caliber deserves nothing less than complete honesty and genuine respect." As the meeting concluded, Maya understood that her real work was just beginning. Derek Morrison's suspension would grab headlines, but lasting change required the kind of cultural transformation that took months to implement and years to prove. She'd seen enough corporate crisis management to know that this community would be watching, measuring Harbour Sports' actions against their promises. Outside the town council chambers, Maya found herself face to face with the "Veterans Welcome Here" signs that dotted every storefront. Each one was a silent rebuke to the failures of leadership that had brought her to Seabrook Harbour, but also a reminder of the values she'd sworn to uphold when she first put on an army uniform. The meeting with Marcus Rodriguez awaited, and Maya knew it would be the most important conversation of her corporate career, not because of the potential legal implications or media attention, but because it would determine whether Harbour Sports could earn back the trust they'd so carelessly thrown away. Betty Morrison had been awake since 4 a.m., her 72-year-old hands trembling as she read Elena Vasquez's article for the 6th time on her tablet. The photograph accompanying the story showed Marcus Rodriguez at a community event, his prosthetic leg visible as he helped a group of teenagers set up camping equipment. The man her son had humiliated, called a fraud, dismissed as a troublemaker, he was everything Derek was not. She sat in the kitchen of the house where she'd raised Derek alone after his father died in Korea, surrounded by photographs that told the story of a military family's sacrifice. Staff Sergeant Robert Morrison smiled from his army dress blues. In the largest frame, forever 24, forever proud, forever unaware that his son would grow up to disrespect the very values for which he'd died. The morning light filtering through her lace curtains illuminated the Purple Heart display case that had been Derek's inheritance, along with the folded flag and the letter from his commanding officer praising Robert's courage under fire. Betty had spent 30 years trying to pass those values to her son, and now she understood how completely she had failed. Her phone had been ringing since dawn. Neighbors, church friends, women from her quilting circle, all wanting to know if it was true, if her Derek was really the man who'd treated Marcus Rodriguez with such disrespect. Each call had been harder than the last, the shame building in her chest like a physical weight. At 8 a.m., Betty Morrison made a decision that would have made her late husband proud. She dressed in her best church outfit, pinned Robert's Purple Heart to her lapel, and drove to Harbour Sports and Outdoors with the determination of a woman who understood that some mistakes demanded public accountability. Derek was restocking fishing lures when she walked through the store's entrance, her sensible shoes clicking against the polished floor with the rhythm of approaching judgment. The few customers in the store noticed her immediately, not because of her age, but because of the way she carried herself, like a storm front moving across calm water. "Derek Michael Morrison." Her voice cut through the store's ambient noise. "Like a blade. You will stop what you're doing and face me this instant." Derek looked up, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror as he saw his mother standing in the aisle where just 3 days ago he'd humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient. Betty Morrison had never raised her voice in public, had never created a scene, had spent her entire life embodying the quiet dignity that military families understood as both duty and privilege. "Mom, what are you doing here? I told you I'd call you back. Don't you dare mom me." Betty's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd buried her husband at 26 and raised a child alone through sheer force of will. "Not after what you've done. Not after the shame you've brought on your father's memory." The store fell silent. Customers stopped pretending to browse. Staff members emerged from the back room, and even the ambient music seemed to fade beneath. The weight of a mother's disappointment. Derek's face flushed as he realized they had an audience, but Betty was beyond caring about discretion. "Do you know who Marcus Rodriguez is, Derek? Do you have any idea what that man has sacrificed for this country?" Derek's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as Betty continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He's a Medal of Honor recipient. He lost his leg saving 6 of his teammates in Afghanistan. He spent 8 years serving this community, helping military children, supporting veteran families. And you called him a fraud." Betty pulled out her tablet, Eleanor's article displayed on the screen. "I've read about what you did, how you followed him around the store like a criminal, how you accused him of shoplifting, how you dismissed his military ID without even looking at it." Her voice cracked slightly. "How you disrespected everything your father died defending." Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mom, you don't understand. I was just doing my job. Store policy." "Your job?" Betty's laugh held no humor. "Your job is to serve customers with respect and dignity. Your job is to honor the values your father died for. Your job is to be a man worthy of the name Morrison." She gestured toward the purple heart on her lapel. "This was your inheritance. Derek, this and the principles it represents, and you've dishonored both." The elderly woman from the fishing section, Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer for 20 years, stepped forward. "Betty, honey, we all know what kind of boy you raised. This isn't your fault." "Isn't it?" Betty turned to face the gathered customers, her voice carrying to every corner of the store. "I failed him. I failed to teach him that strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. I failed to show him that respect is earned through service, not demanded through authority." Derek's carefully constructed facade crumbled as he faced not just his mother's disappointment, but the judgment of an entire community that had watched him abuse his position. "Mom, please, not here, not like this. Exactly here, exactly like this." Betty's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You humiliated Marcus Rodriguez publicly in front of his neighbors and his daughter. You questioned the integrity of a man who sacrificed more for this country than you can possibly comprehend. If you can dish out public humiliation, you can certainly take it." She stepped closer to her son, and for a moment, her voice softened with the love that had sustained them both through decades of single parenthood. "Derek, I see your father in you sometimes. I see the potential for honor, for service, for becoming the man he wanted you to be. But what you did to Marcus Rodriguez, that's not the son I raised. That's not the man your father died protecting." Derek's shoulders began to shake as 35 years of expectations, disappointments, and missed opportunities crashed down on him. The customers watching this public reckoning saw something that surprised them. Not defiance or anger, but genuine anguish from a man who'd finally understood the weight of his actions. "What do I do, Mom? How do I fix this?" Betty Morrison looked at her son with the mixture of love and disappointment that only a parent could carry. "You apologize. Not to corporate, not to the media, but to Marcus Rodriguez himself. You look that man in the eye, and you acknowledge what you've done. You take responsibility for your actions, and you commit to becoming better." She paused, her gaze encompassing the entire store, the witnesses to her son's shame and her own public accountability. "And you start by understanding that serving others, whether in uniform or behind a retail counter, is an honor, not a burden. Your father understood that. Marcus Rodriguez understands that. It's time you learned it too." Betty Morrison turned and walked toward the store's exit, her husband's purple heart catching the morning light, her dignity intact despite the public pain she'd endured. Behind her, Derek stood alone in the wreckage of his authority. Finally, understanding that true strength had nothing to do with the power to humiliate others and everything to do with the courage to face your own failures. The store remained silent long after Betty's departure. Customers and staff processing what they'd witnessed, a mother's love expressed through public accountability, a son's comeuppance delivered with the precision that only family could provide, and a community's understanding that sometimes healing required the courage to confront uncomfortable truths in the bright light of day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Marcus Rodriguez's front porch as the black sedan pulled into his driveway, carrying two passengers who represented very different aspects of the corporate machinery that had allowed Saturday's humiliation to occur. Maya Patel emerged first, her professional attire and measured composure marking her as someone accustomed to difficult conversations. Derek Morrison followed, his usual swagger replaced by the uncertain gait of a man walking toward a reckoning he could no longer avoid. Marcus watched their approach from his living room window, Grace beside him, with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the stubborn line that reminded him so much of her mother. The past 3 days had brought phone calls, media attention, and community support that had overwhelmed him with its intensity. But this moment, facing the man who had questioned his service, his integrity, his very identity, this required a different kind of courage than anything he'd faced in combat. "Dad," Grace said quietly, "you don't have to do this. They're the ones who screwed up. They should be begging." Marcus placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, feeling the tension that coiled through her 16-year-old frame like a compressed spring. "Sometimes, Gracie, the strongest thing you can do is give someone the chance to make things right, even when they don't deserve it." The doorbell rang with the hollow sound that marked momentous occasions in ordinary houses. Marcus opened the door to find Maya Patel standing slightly forward, her expression respectful but not subservient, while Derek Morrison hung back like a man approaching the edge of a cliff. "Mr. Rodriguez," Maya said, her voice carrying the clarity of someone who'd practiced this moment. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. I'm Maya Patel, District Manager for Harbor Sports. I believe you know Mr. Morrison." Marcus nodded, his gaze shifting to Derek, with the same steady assessment he'd once used to evaluate potential threats in hostile territory. Derek Morrison looked like a man who'd aged years in the span of days, his face drawn, his confidence shattered, his eyes carrying the particular shame that came from public accountability. "Please, come in." They settled in Marcus's living room, surrounded by the comfortable furniture and family photographs that told the story of a life built on service and sacrifice. Grace remained standing near the doorway, her presence a silent reminder that this conversation affected more than just the adults in the room. Maya spoke first, her words measured but sincere. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm here to apologize on behalf of Harbor Sports for the treatment you received. What happened was unacceptable, unprofessional, and contrary to everything our company claims to represent." Marcus listened without interruption, his training helping him process not just the words, but the intent behind them. Maya Patel spoke, like someone who understood the weight of the situation, not just as a corporate crisis, but as a failure of basic human decency. "Ms. Patel," Marcus said when she finished, "I appreciate your apology, but I'm not the only person who needs to hear it. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about a pattern of behavior that's affected other people in this community." Maya nodded. "You're right. We've identified multiple incidents involving Mr. Morrison's customer interactions. We're reaching out to every affected customer, and we're implementing comprehensive changes to prevent future occurrences." Derek Morrison had remained silent throughout this exchange, his hands clasped in his lap, his gaze fixed on the floor. Marcus studied him with the patience of someone who'd learned to read men under pressure, seeing past the defensive posture to the genuine anguish beneath. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said quietly, "you wanted to say something to me." Derek looked up, and for the first time since Saturday, Marcus saw him as something other than an antagonist. He saw a man who'd made terrible choices, who'd let insecurity and prejudice guide his actions, but who was now facing the consequences with something approaching genuine remorse. "Mr. Rodriguez," Derek's voice was barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to make. What I did to you was wrong. Not just wrong, it was despicable." Derek paused, gathering himself with visible effort. "I questioned your military service. I called your ID fake. I accused you of shoplifting and banned you from the store. I did all of this because—" His voice broke slightly. "Because I was angry at my own failures, and I took that anger out on you." Marcus remained silent, allowing Derek the space to continue. My father died in Korea when I was 2 years old. He was a staff sergeant, a good soldier who believed in honor and service. My mother spent my whole life trying to teach me his values, and I failed her. I failed him. I failed you." Derek's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for days. "When I saw you in the store, I saw everything I wasn't. A real veteran, a decorated hero, someone who'd actually sacrificed for something bigger than himself. And instead of respecting that, I attacked it." Grace moved closer to her father, her anger softening slightly as she witnessed Derek's breakdown. This wasn't the arrogant store manager who'd humiliated her father. This was a broken man confronting his own failures. "Mr. Rodriguez," Derek continued, "I know this apology doesn't fix what I did. I know it doesn't take back the humiliation or the disrespect. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what you've sacrificed, what you represent, what I should have honored instead of attacking." Marcus looked at Derek Morrison for a long moment, seeing past the tears and shame to something that might, with time and effort, become genuine change. His response came from the same place that had made him a leader in combat, the understanding that true strength sometimes meant extending grace to those who didn't deserve it. "Mr. Morrison, I accept your apology. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because I believe you're genuinely sorry and committed to doing better." Derek nodded, relief and gratitude washing over his features. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak about honor and service. "But apologies without action are just words. If you're serious about change, you need to prove it through your behavior, your choices, your treatment of others." Maya leaned forward. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've suspended Mr. Morrison pending a complete investigation. We're implementing mandatory sensitivity training, revising our customer service protocols, and establishing veteran liaison programs at all our locations." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged. "But real change happens one interaction at a time, one choice at a time. It happens when someone like Mr. Morrison decides to see each customer as a person deserving of dignity and respect." Derek wiped. His eyes, his voice stronger now. "I want to do better, Mr. Rodriguez. I want to become the kind of man my father would have been proud of, the kind of man my mother tried to raise. I don't know how, but I want to try." Marcus stood, extending his hand to Derek with the same grace he'd shown throughout this ordeal. "Then we start there, Mr. Morrison. We start with the desire to do better, and we build from there." As Derek shook Marcus's hand, both men understood that this moment marked not an ending, but a beginning. The apology had been offered and accepted, but the real work, the daily choice to honor service, respect sacrifice, and treat others with dignity, that work would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded. Outside, the sun was setting over Seabrook Harbor, casting the small coastal town in the golden light that promised new days and second chances for those brave enough to earn them. The harbor's Edge restaurant had been transformed for the evening, its usual casual dining atmosphere replaced by something that felt more like a town hall meeting, crossed with a family reunion. Tommy Jackson had cleared the main dining room, arranging tables in a large circle that could accommodate the 60-plus people who'd gathered on this Thursday evening for what the hastily printed flyers called a community conversation about service and respect. Marcus Rodriguez sat at one end of the circle, still uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but understanding that this moment was bigger than his personal preferences. To his left, Grace sat with the quiet pride of a daughter who'd watched her father handle crisis with dignity. Captain Rivera occupied the chair to Marcus's right, his dress blues serving as a visual reminder of the military values that had sparked this community reckoning. Across the circle, Derek Morrison sat between his mother Betty and Maya Patel, his presence at the gathering having been debated extensively before Marcus himself had insisted that redemption required participation, not exile. Derek's face, still, carried the weight of public shame, but something in his posture suggested a man who'd begun the difficult work of genuine change. Elena Vasquez moved through the gathering with her camera and notebook, but tonight she was more participant than observer. Her article had started this conversation, but what happened next would be determined by the community itself. Tommy stood to address the crowd, his natural charisma making him an ideal moderator for what could have been a difficult conversation. Folks, we're here tonight because something happened in our community that forced us to look at ourselves and ask some hard questions about respect, about service, about how we treat each other. He gestured toward Marcus. Most of you know Marcus Rodriguez. You know what he's done for this town, what he's done for our kids, what he's sacrificed for all of us. But last Saturday, he was treated with disrespect that no person should face, let alone a decorated veteran. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Mrs. Patterson from the fishing tackle shop nodded emphatically, while Jim Henley, the Marine veteran who'd witnessed the incident, crossed his arms with the intensity of someone still processing his anger. Tommy continued, "But we're not here to relitigate what happened. We're here to talk about what comes next. How do we make sure this never happens again? How do we build a community where service is honored and every person is treated with dignity?" Tank Thompson stood from her position near the kitchen. "I'll start. What happened to Marcus made me realize we can't take respect for granted. We can't assume everyone understands what service means, what sacrifice looks like. We have to actively teach it, model it, demand it." Doc Chen nodded from his spot near the front. "Tank's right. As a community, we have a responsibility to educate, not just punish. When someone doesn't understand the significance of military service, we need to help them learn." From across the circle, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Derek Morrison stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly, as he faced the community that had witnessed his public humiliation and his mother's powerful rebuke. "I'd like to say something, if that's okay." The room fell silent, the kind of absolute quiet that marked moments of genuine importance. Derek's voice was steady, but carried the humility of someone who'd been forced to confront his own failures. "Most of you know what I did, what I said to Mr. Rodriguez, how I treated him. There's no excuse for it, and I'm not here to make any." Derek's gaze found Marcus across the circle. "But I want to tell you what I've learned, and what I'm committed to doing differently." Derek paused, gathering himself. "I grew up without a father. He died in Korea when I was too young to remember him. My mother tried to teach me his values, honor, respect, service, but I was too proud, too insecure to listen. When I saw Mr. Rodriguez in the store, instead of seeing a hero, I saw a threat to my authority. Instead of honoring his service, I attacked it." Betty Morrison reached over and took her son's hand, a gesture of support that didn't minimize his accountability, but acknowledged his effort to do better. "I've asked Harbor Sports to let me participate in the veteran sensitivity training they're implementing, not because corporate requires it, but because I need to understand what I've been ignorant about my whole life. I want to learn what my father knew, what Mr. Rodriguez exemplifies, what this community values." Derek's voice grew stronger. "I also want to volunteer with the Youth Veterans Program if Mr. Rodriguez will have me. Not in any leadership capacity, I need to earn that, but doing whatever work needs to be done. I want to show through actions, not just words, that I'm committed to change." Marcus stood, his movement drawing every eye in the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned that true leadership meant lifting others up, even when they'd failed you. "Derek, I appreciate your willingness to learn and serve. The youth program can always use volunteers, and sometimes the best teachers are people who've learned from their own mistakes. Captain Rivera rose next, his presence commanding immediate attention. What I've witnessed in Seabrook Harbor this week represents the best of American values. A community that refuses to accept disrespect toward those who've served, but also demonstrates the grace to offer redemption to those who seek it genuinely. Rivera reached into his briefcase and withdrew a certificate. Mr. Rodriguez, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command and your former teammates who couldn't be here tonight, I want to present you with a certificate of community service recognizing your 8 years of dedication to military families and at-risk youth. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Marcus gestured for quiet. This recognition belongs to all of us, to Tank, Doc, and Tommy, who reminded me that we don't stand alone. To this community, that showed what happens when people of good faith come together. To Derek, who had the courage to face his mistakes publicly. To my daughter Grace, who's learning that strength comes from standing up for what's right while showing grace to those who stumble. Grace stood beside her father, her young voice clear and strong. What happened to my dad hurt, but what I've learned is that how we respond to hurt defines who we are. This community chose to respond with strength, with unity, and with the understanding that we're all capable of being better than our worst moments. Elena Vasquez raised her hand. I'd like to propose something. What if we made this gathering an annual tradition, a time to recognize service, discuss community values, and ensure we never forget the lessons we've learned? The suggestion met with enthusiastic approval, and Tommy immediately volunteered Harbor's Edge as the permanent venue. As the formal program concluded, conversations continued in smaller groups throughout the restaurant. Veterans shared stories. With young people, business owners discussed ways to better serve military families. And Derek Morrison found himself in earnest conversation with several community members about the veteran sensitivity program he was developing. Outside, the lights of Seabrook Harbor reflected off the calm water, and in the windows of businesses throughout the town, veterans' welcome here signs continued to shine like beacons of a community's commitment to honoring those who'd served. The incident that had begun with one man's prejudice and insecurity had become a catalyst for something larger, a community's rededication to the values of service, respect, and redemption that defined America at its best. The healing was real, the changes were meaningful, and the future looked brighter for everyone who'd had the courage to participate in this difficult but necessary conversation. 6 months after Derek Morrison had publicly humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient in harbor sports and outdoors, the autumn light filtering through the tall windows of Seabrook Harbor Elementary School illuminated a scene that would have been impossible to imagine on that bitter Saturday morning. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the front of a packed auditorium, watching 15 teenagers in matching navy blue t-shirts demonstrate wilderness survival skills to an audience of younger students, parents, and community leaders. The Harbor Youth Veterans Program had grown beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. What began as a small outdoor education initiative for military children had evolved into a comprehensive mentorship program that paired at-risk youth with veteran volunteers, teaching life skills through outdoor adventures while building the kind of character that couldn't be measured in test scores. Derek Morrison knelt beside 12-year-old Sophia Henley, the daughter of the Marine veteran who'd witnessed the original incident, helping her tie the bowline knot that would secure her shelter for the night. 6 months of volunteer work had transformed Derek from an angry, insecure store manager into something approaching the man his father might have been proud of. The change hadn't been easy. It had required therapy, genuine self-reflection, and the kind of sustained effort that marked real personal growth. Remember, Derek said quietly to Sophia, his voice carrying none of the brittle authority that had once marked his interactions with customers. "The knot has to be tight enough to hold, but loose enough that you can untie it when you need to. It's about finding the right balance." Sophia nodded seriously, her small fingers working through the rope with the concentration of someone who understood that what she was learning went beyond simple knot tying. In the 6 months since Derek had begun volunteering with the program, he discovered that teaching others had become his own education in patience, humility, and service. From her position near the back of the auditorium, Elena Vasquez observed the scene with the satisfaction of a journalist who'd watched a story evolve from crisis to transformation. Her original article about Marcus's humiliation had won 3 state journalism awards and led to policy changes at retail chains across the Southeast. But more importantly, it had sparked a conversation about veteran treatment that continued to ripple through communities far beyond Seabrook Harbor. Elena's follow-up series, A Community's Response, had documented the town's journey from anger to accountability to healing. The final installment, which she was researching today, would focus on the lasting changes that had emerged from one moment of injustice. Tank Thompson moved through the crowd with her usual confident stride, but her hard hat had been replaced by a navy blue cap, marking her as a program advisor. Her construction company now employed 3 program graduates, young people who'd learned that meaningful work was another form of service. The skills they'd developed in the program, leadership, responsibility, attention to detail, translated directly into successful careers in the trades. Doc Chen stood near the stage, watching his teenage nephew demonstrate first aid techniques to a group of wide-eyed elementary students. As program medical advisor, Doc had helped develop curriculum that taught not just outdoor skills but life skills: how to handle pressure, how to work as a team, how to take care of each other. The waiting list for the program now stretched to 60 kids, and they were planning to expand to neighboring towns. Captain Rivera, who'd made quarterly visits to Seabrook Harbor since the incident, sat in the front row wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. His presence had lent credibility to the program's expansion, helping secure federal grants and military partnerships that ensured its long-term sustainability. Grace Rodriguez, now 17 and preparing for her senior year, served as the program's youth coordinator, her natural leadership abilities having blossomed under her father's mentorship. She moved through the demonstration with the confidence of someone who'd learned that strength came not from avoiding difficult conversations, but from leading them with grace and principle. Betty Morrison sat beside Captain Rivera, her pride evident as she watched her son work with the children. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been setbacks, moments of frustration, conversations that lasted until dawn. But Derek's commitment to change had proven genuine, and Betty had lived long enough to understand that redemption was sometimes measured in small daily choices rather than grand gestures. Maya Patel had driven down from Atlanta for the event, her presence representing Harbor Sports' ongoing commitment to the veteran community. The company's veteran liaison program, born from the crisis in Seabrook Harbor, had become a model for corporate responsibility. Derek's participation in developing the training curriculum had turned him into an unlikely expert on veteran sensitivity, and he now traveled to other stores to share his story and lead workshops on respect and service. As the demonstration concluded, Marcus stepped forward to address the audience. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned that true leadership meant creating opportunities for others to succeed. 6 months ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. Something happened in our community that reminded us why respect and dignity matter. But what happened next? How we chose to respond, that's what defines us. He gestured toward the teenagers who'd just completed their demonstration. These young people represent the future of our community. They've learned skills that will serve them in any career, any challenge, any situation where they need to rely on themselves and each other. Marcus's gaze found Derek in the crowd. They've also learned that mistakes don't define us. How we learn from them does. That second chances are earned through consistent action, not empty promises. That true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but Marcus wasn't finished. This program exists because a community decided that respect for service wasn't just a slogan, it was a living commitment. Because business leaders, medical professionals, educators, and volunteers chose to invest their time and expertise in the next generation. Grace joined her father on the stage, her young voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My dad taught me that honor isn't something you display on a wall. It's something you live every day through your choices, your actions, your treatment of others. Everyone in this room, everyone who supported this program, has helped restore honor to our community. As the formal ceremony concluded and families began gathering their children, Derek Morrison found himself face-to-face with Marcus Rodriguez. Near the exit, the two men had worked together for 6 months, but their interaction still carried the weight of history and the possibility of continued growth. Marcus, Derek said quietly, I know I thank you every time we work together, but I need you to understand, this program, this work, it's given me purpose I never knew I was missing. Marcus extended his hand, as he had 6 months earlier in his living room, but now the gesture carried the weight of earned respect rather than offered grace. Derek, you've shown what genuine change looks like. Your father would be proud. Outside the elementary school, the October sun cast long shadows across Seabrook Harbor, where veterans welcome here signs had become permanent fixtures rather than temporary statements of support. The harbor reflected the afternoon light like a mirror, calm and clear, suggesting the peace that came when a community chose healing over hatred, growth over grievance. The incident that had begun with prejudice and ended with transformation would be remembered not for the moment of failure, but for the sustained commitment to do better that followed. In a small coastal town that understood the value of service and sacrifice, honor had been challenged, tested, and ultimately restored through the patient work of people who refused to let one man's dignity be diminished without consequence. The Youth Veterans Program continued its work. The community maintained its commitment to respect, and the future stretched ahead bright with the promise of young people who'd learned that true strength came not from authority over others, but from service to something greater than themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.